The fact is that we are now facing the grim reality that everything that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad predicted has now come to pass.
In the Holy Quran, God tells us that He will personally teach His Messiah. And that Messiah will then teach His people what to eat and what to store in their houses, among other things.
You need to store some water in your homes. You need to store some food in your homes, groceries that will allow you to be in your homes for 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months.
This Messiah would be used to resurrect His people from their dead-like condition and warn of the judgment of God. Basically, preparing His people for a day and time like this. A time described in the Holy Quran as being full of corruption in the land, in the sea, and in the air as a result of what corrupt people have done.
So the evil of the wicked scientists of death is creating a plague that God Himself is allowing, because God is the only way out. Ain't no other way.
Those who follow the guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his servant, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, are not surprised by the numerous events unfolding in America and around the world, because these men have been most dutiful in preparing us for such a time as this, based on the light of prophecy.
The plagues that were seen in the time of Egypt are now on America and the world. And whether you know it or not, death now is covering the earth like a plague. And God is using widespread death to show His power as a Savior.
The prophecies give us several signs of superpowers being brought down from within. Signs of their wealth being broken, pestilence and diseases, political discord and social chaos. So the scriptures instruct us to separate from such wicked systems, so we won't be contaminated by the wicked plagues of our oppressors.
Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins and of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven. Don't integrate in her. Come out. Come out.
The scriptures show us signs of the oppressor's system of wealth being broken, to encourage God's people to separate from Pharaoh's slave-based system, a system that God even predicted would be destroyed.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad warned us that 100% inflation would come to America, totally destroying the value of the dollar. He wrote that a financial crash was on the way, more severe than the stock market crash in 1929. And he wrote that America would experience a loss of wealth so severe that it would force the descendants of slaves to finally get up and do something for themselves economically.
God has always wanted His chosen people to separate from the powers that enslaved them, and for them to have a promised land of their own, so they can be what He truly intended for them.
That's why we need to be separated from this enemy, so that the disease of having been a slave can be healed. Yeah. We need to be quarantined for a while to let God work on us.
But like Pharaoh, many American and Israeli leaders see their world of white dominance rapidly falling. And instead of being saved by the solutions offered by their once slaves, they seek to deceive and destroy God's people before they can inherit their own land and their own divine blessings. This is why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, like Moses and Aaron, have been the primary proponents of separation as the best and only solution. The God of Scriptures never wanted his people dependent on an oppressive system that was never even designed for their real freedom, justice, or equality. Not only is that God's way, that's just common sense. You know, sometimes God seizes nations with distress and affliction in hopes that they will humble themselves and heed the guidance of his messengers.
Because we're getting closer and closer to a time and there's no turning back. America is under divine judgment, and so are we. So we can't play around with the truth.
Times like this start to show that we would be wise to heed the wisdom of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Will America reject solutions to its sin-sick problems like the early colonial Puritans did 300 years ago? You know, when early Americans were suffering from a smallpox epidemic, the solutions to inoculate the disease came from a black man, Onesimus, who was the slave of the Puritan leader Cotton Mather. Even though Americans were dying, most of the white leaders like Dr. Emmanuel Timonius and Jacobus Pilarinus rejected the solutions as Negroish evidence because it came from a black slave whose treatments came from Islamic and African practices of the East. Once the colonies nearly collapsed from the same diseases they brought over here, they had no choice but to accept the proven solution. Solutions to the same diseases the early Americans purposely used to decimate the indigenous people of this land. A black man with seemingly radical solutions has saved this country before. If America's leaders are humble enough to accept wisdom from that child of slaves in her midst and stop mistreating God's people, this country and the world might have a chance to overcome their prophesied doom.
But it is coming. And I pray that America will recognize that black folk are nothing for you to play with. You may think you can kill us, but you will only be ending up destroying yourself.